Today, Mosman is recognised as one of Australia's most prestigious harbour suburbs. Its waterfront homes, heritage streets, sheltered beaches, and sweeping views across Sydney Harbour have made it one of the country's most desirable places to live. At first glance, its reputation can seem almost inevitable, as though this peninsula was always destined to become a symbol of wealth, lifestyle, and prestige. Yet history tells a very different story. Long before luxury homes overlooked these waters, this landscape served entirely different purposes. For thousands of years, it formed part of the country of the Borrogaggle people. Later, it became a working whaling settlement. Then, over more than a century, the peninsula evolved into one of Australia's most heavily fortified military landscapes, where powerful guns, hidden tunnels, and coastal defences stood ready to protect Sydney Harbour. The question is not simply why prestige exists here. It is how a peninsula once valued for survival, industry, and defence gradually transformed into one of Australia's most exclusive residential suburbs, and what that remarkable transformation reveals about the changing history of Sydney itself. Today, Mosman occupies one of the most distinctive positions on Sydney Harbour. Unlike many of Sydney's prestigious suburbs, its identity extends far beyond luxury homes alone. Sheltered beaches, preserved bushland, historic headlands, military heritage, and quiet residential streets exist side by side, creating a landscape where history and everyday life remain closely intertwined. From Balmoral Beach to Taronga Zoo, and the former defence sites overlooking the harbour, Mosman possesses a character unlike anywhere else in the city. Its location has always been one of its greatest strengths. Situated on Sydney's lower north shore, the peninsula commands sweeping views across the harbour. While remaining only a short distance from Sydney's central business district, ferries, roads, and generations of carefully planned urban development gradually transformed what was once an isolated landscape into one of Australia's most desirable residential environments. Yet geography alone cannot explain what happened here. Many suburbs enjoy beautiful harbour views. Many occupy valuable waterfront land. Yet few have followed a path as distinctive as Mosman. Long before prestige became part of its identity, this peninsula was shaped by Indigenous history, commercial whaling, military fortifications, and decades of strategic importance, leaving a lasting imprint on both the landscape and the suburb that would eventually emerge. To understand how Mosman became one of Australia's most prestigious harbour suburbs, we must return to the beginning, when this celebrated peninsula was valued, not for luxury, but for the natural landscape that first drew people to its shores. At first glance, the explanation appears straightforward. Beautiful harbour views attract affluent residents. Affluent residents create demand for prestigious homes. Over time, an exclusive suburb emerges, but history tells a far more complex story. Sydney Harbour is lined with waterfront communities. Many enjoy spectacular scenery, valuable land, and close proximity to the city. Yet only a handful developed the unique combination of heritage, military history, natural landscapes, and residential prestige that defines Mosman today. Luxury alone cannot explain why this peninsula followed such a distinctive path. So, what made Mosman different? Was it simply the beauty of Sydney Harbour? Did decades of military investment permanently shape its future? Or did geography, transport, preservation, and generations of gradual change combine to transform a strategic defence peninsula into one of Australia's most prestigious residential suburbs? To answer that question, the investigation must begin long before the grand homes, waterfront estates, and quiet tree-lined streets of today. When this peninsula was valued, not for the lives people hoped to build here, but for the landscape that first made it important. Long before Mosman became associated with prestige, wealth, or harbourside living, it was the landscape that defined this peninsula. Stretching into the waters of Sydney Harbour, The area occupies one of the most distinctive natural positions anywhere along Australia's eastern coastline. Sheltered coves, elevated sandstone headlands, deep natural harbours, and dense bushland combined to create a landscape that was both beautiful and strategically significant. Long before roads, suburbs, or military fortifications appeared, geography had already begun shaping the future importance of this place. For thousands of years before European settlement, this peninsula formed part of the country of the Borragagal people of the Eora Nation. The harbour was far more than a scenic backdrop. It provided food, transport, fresh water, and a network of sheltered waterways that connected neighbouring communities across Sydney Harbour. The surrounding bushland supplied natural resources, while the headlands offered commanding views across the water. Daily life was shaped by the rhythms of the landscape itself. The arrival of the British in 1788 marked the beginning of a profound transformation. As colonial settlement expanded beyond Sydney Cove, the northern shores of the harbour gradually attracted the attention of explorers, surveyors, and government officials. Unlike the fertile lands farther inland, however, this peninsula offered little opportunity for large-scale agriculture. Steep sandstone ridges, rocky terrain, and dense vegetation discouraged farming, leaving much of the landscape largely untouched during the colony's early decades. Yet what initially appeared to be a disadvantage would eventually become one of Mosman's greatest strengths. The same elevated headlands that made farming difficult offered extraordinary views across Sydney Harbour. Deep, sheltered coves provided safe anchorages, while rugged sandstone cliffs formed natural defensive positions overlooking the harbour entrance. Without anyone realising it, geography was quietly shaping a very different future. There was little to suggest that this isolated peninsula would one day become one of Australia's most prestigious residential suburbs. Yet the foundations of that transformation were already in place. Its natural harbour, strategic location, and remarkable landscape would influence every stage of the history that followed. What began as a place valued for survival and geography would, over time, become one of the most desirable addresses in the country. Instead, it was the harbour itself that gave rise to one of the area's earliest commercial industries. In 1831, Scottish brothers Archibald and George Mosman established a shore-based whaling station along the calm waters of what is now Mosman Bay, at a time when whale oil illuminated homes and streets throughout the colony. Whaling had become an important part of Sydney's economy. The protected harbour provided an ideal location for processing whales brought in from nearby coastal waters, and the enterprise soon became closely associated with the surrounding landscape. Over time, local residents began referring to the area simply as Mosman's Bay. Gradually, the possessive disappeared, and the name evolved into Mosman, a reminder that the suburb owes its identity not to government planning or military history, but to a commercial enterprise established almost 2 centuries ago. Even then, Mosman remained far removed from the residential suburb recognised today. Large private estates gradually spread across the peninsula, separated by sandstone ridges, bushland, and rough tracks that made overland travel slow and difficult. A small community of whalers, fishermen, estate workers, and landowners occupied the area, while much of the landscape remained remarkably undeveloped. The peninsula was valued for its working harbour rather than for its lifestyle. Yet another transformation was already underway. As Sydney continued to expand, colonial authorities began looking beyond commerce. The same elevated headlands that overlooked the harbour also commanded its entrance. What had first attracted whalers would soon attract military engineers, searching for something entirely different, a place capable of defending Australia's most important harbour. The peninsula was about to take on a new purpose. The transformation that had begun with whaling soon entered an entirely different phase. As the 19th century progressed, Sydney itself was changing. The colony expanded, Maritime trade increased, and Sydney Harbour became one of Australia's most valuable strategic assets. Any hostile naval force approaching the city would first have to pass through the narrow entrance to the harbour. Protecting that gateway became an increasingly urgent priority. Few places were better suited to that task than Mosman's rugged headlands. Middle Head, George Head, and Bradley's Head rose high above the harbour, commanding sweeping views across the shipping channels below. Their elevated sandstone cliffs offered natural defensive positions that military engineers quickly recognised. Geography, once valued for fishing and whaling, was now being viewed through an entirely different lens. Throughout the late 19th century, these headlands were gradually transformed into one of Australia's most important coastal defence systems. Gun batteries were constructed, underground tunnels carved through sandstone, ammunition magazines concealed beneath the landscape, and military roads linked a growing network of fortifications. The peninsula became a place of preparedness, rather than prosperity, where soldiers trained and engineers planned for threats that in many cases never materialized. International events only accelerated that transformation. Growing concerns about foreign naval powers, particularly during the period known as the Russian Scare, prompted colonial authorities to strengthen Sydney's harbour defences even further. New artillery installations appeared across Mosman's headlands, while advances in military technology led to increasingly sophisticated defensive systems. Controlled underwater mines were prepared beneath the harbour entrance, connected to observation posts and command facilities overlooking the water. Together, these installations formed one of the most advanced harbour defence networks in Australia. Mosman's strategic importance continued well into the 20th century. Following the Federation of Australia in 1901, responsibility for defending Sydney Harbour passed from the colony of New South Wales to the new Commonwealth government. Rather than losing its military role, the peninsula became an integral part of Australia's national defence infrastructure, remaining active through both world wars. Its military significance reached another peak during the Second World War. In 1942, Japanese midget submarines entered Sydney Harbour, bringing war to Australia's largest city. Although the attack caused limited military damage, it confirmed that the threat colonial engineers had long prepared for was no longer hypothetical. Observation posts, artillery positions, and anti-submarine defences across Mosman's headlands once again became central to the protection of Sydney Harbour. Yet, history was about to take another unexpected turn. Advances in aviation, missile technology, and modern warfare gradually rendered fixed coastal fortifications obsolete. Military activity declined, the batteries fell silent, and many defence installations were eventually abandoned. The peninsula that had spent generations preparing for war was now on the threshold of an entirely different future. The decline of Mosman's military role did not diminish the importance of the peninsula. Instead, it revealed an entirely different kind of value. As Australia's defence strategy evolved during the second half of the 20th century, many of the fortifications that had once protected Sydney Harbour gradually became obsolete. Military activity declined, defence installations were decommissioned, and large areas of government land faced an uncertain future. What had once been closed military landscapes could easily have been sold for residential development. Instead, much of the peninsula was preserved. Former defence sites were gradually transformed into public parklands, heritage precincts, and protected bushland. Underground tunnels, gun emplacements, and military roads survived alongside walking trails, harbour lookouts, and native vegetation, rather than disappearing beneath new housing estates. Significant parts of Mosman's historic landscape remained remarkably intact, allowing the area's past to become part of everyday life. At the same time, Sydney continued to expand. Improved transport, rising household incomes, and changing lifestyles increased demand for suburbs that offered more than convenient housing. People increasingly sought places that combine natural beauty, recreation, heritage, and close proximity to the city. Mosman was uniquely positioned to meet those expectations. Its appeal extended far beyond its harbour views. Balmoral Beach became one of Sydney's most celebrated harbour beaches, while Taronga Zoo introduced generations of visitors to the peninsula. Heritage homes, preserved streetscapes, and extensive public parklands created an environment unlike that of many other waterfront suburbs. The same geography that had once served defence was now being valued for entirely different reasons. Scarcity further reinforced that transformation. Large areas of bushland and protected public land limited future development, while the amount of privately owned waterfront property remained permanently constrained by geography. As Sydney's population continued to grow, demand steadily increased for homes overlooking one of the world's great natural harbours. Limited supply and growing desirability combined to reshape Mosman's property market over successive generations. By the beginning of the 21st century, the transformation was unmistakable. Mosman was no longer defined by whaling stations, artillery batteries, or military planning. It had become one of Australia's most prestigious residential suburbs, a place where geography, Indigenous history, industry, defence, transport, conservation, and careful urban development came together to create an identity unlike anywhere else in Sydney. The answer to our question lies not in a single event, but in the way multiple forces converged over time. Mosman did not become one of Australia's most prestigious harbour suburbs simply because it overlooks Sydney Harbour, nor was its reputation shaped by wealth alone. Many suburbs share similar advantages, yet few have followed such a distinctive historical path. Instead, its transformation unfolded gradually. The peninsula first became significant because of its geography. Sheltered coves, elevated sandstone headlands, and commanding views across the harbour shaped life here for thousands of years before European settlement. During the 19th century, those same natural advantages attracted commercial whaling, giving the suburb both its name and its earliest economic purpose. As Sydney grew, strategic priorities transformed the peninsula into one of Australia's most important coastal defence landscapes, where generations of military planning left a lasting imprint on both the land and the community. Over time, the purpose of the peninsula changed once again. Improved transport connected Mosman more closely with the rest of Sydney, while former military land was preserved, rather than extensively redeveloped. Heritage homes, public parklands, harbour beaches, and protected bushland gradually came to reinforce one another, creating an environment where history, landscape, and everyday life became inseparable. That is why Mosman stands apart today. Its reputation was never built by a single development, a single generation, or a single period of prosperity. Instead, it emerged through the combined influence of geography, Indigenous history, industry, defence, transport, preservation, and careful urban evolution. Together, these forces transformed Mosman into one of Australia's most distinctive harbour suburbs. The question then is no longer how Mosman became prestigious. It is what that remarkable journey reveals about Australia itself. Mosman's story reaches far beyond wealth, prestige, or harbourside living. It demonstrates that the identity of a place is rarely defined by a single purpose. Instead, it evolves across generations as each era leaves behind traces that continue to shape the landscape. Long after its original role has faded, geography, Indigenous history, commercial enterprise, military strategy, transport, conservation, and urban planning each added another layer to the suburb we recognise today. In many ways, Mosman reflects a broader chapter in Australia's history, Across the country, landscapes have continually adapted to changing needs. Places once valued for survival became centres of commerce. Industrial districts evolved into residential communities. Former military sites found new life as public parks and heritage precincts. As society changed, so too did the meaning of the landscapes it inherited. Mosman is one of the clearest examples of that transformation. Its sandstone headlands once overlooked Aboriginal fishing grounds. Later, they watched over whaling operations, artillery batteries, military observation posts, and wartime defences. Today, those same cliffs frame walking trails, harbour beaches, family neighbourhoods, and some of Australia's most desirable homes. The landscape itself has remained remarkably constant, while the reasons people value it have changed again and again. Understanding Mosman is therefore about more than explaining one of Australia's most prestigious harbour suburbs. It is about recognising that history rarely disappears. More often, it survives beneath the surface, quietly shaping the places we see today, until the past itself becomes part of everyday life. Mosman is often recognised as one of Australia's most prestigious harbour suburbs, yet behind its waterfront homes, sheltered beaches, and remarkable harbour views lies a far longer story, one shaped by Indigenous history, commercial enterprise, military strategy, transport, preservation, and generations of gradual transformation. What appears today as effortless prestige is, in reality, the result of more than 2 centuries of change, with each generation adding another chapter to a landscape that never stopped evolving. Every place has a history. Some simply reveal more about Australia than others. Thank you for watching Beneath Australia. If you enjoy cinematic documentaries exploring the history, landscapes, and forgotten stories that have shaped Australia, consider subscribing and join us for the next investigation.